So what I want to do in this time that I have with you is bring you into my world, the world of roboticists, the world of AI, because now it's really popular. So one of the things about robotics and AI is that I've seen the transition. So I started off at NASA, and I'll tell you a little bit about that story. And then we were doing robotics, and we were doing artificial intelligence, but it was in a different, we didn't even use those words, right? It was autonomy and autonomous control and systems. And we really didn't throw out the words AI and robotics all that often. And now we are at a world where everything is a robot. That chair is a robot, right? And so I've seen this transition. I want to kind of bring you into this world about what really is AI, how it can be used to empower us, but also some of the things we need to be careful about. I really, in this time, want to challenge some of your assumptions. So there's a lot of things out there in the media and the news about, AI, whether it's going to take over our jobs, replace us, or make our lives better. And there's some truth to all of that, and there's some fallacy as well. And so I hope at the end of this session, you will at least have some understanding and some power in your own hands to really start questioning some of the things that are out there that's being basically given to you and covers your everyday thinking. So if I think about the future of industry and where we're going and this world of AI and the things that really make it impactful. So one, there are sensors all around us. If you think about where you are now, everyone in this room, unless you forgot your phone in your hotel room, has a sensor on them. Your phone is one of the most powerful sensing devices that's out there, and it knows almost everything and anything about you. And then there's the Fitbit and the watches that are also collecting data. There's as you're going outside, most streets now have cameras that are also there collecting information and data. And so our world now is filled with data, and this data, which is huge, AI helps us transform it from just data, raw numbers and bits, into things that are useful, that could really impact and make our world better, but can also possibly damage in some ways. And so I want to kind of lead you into that. But what it also means that as businesses, as we are hiring the next workforce, as we're thinking about where we're going with our business, we have to integrate these AI aspects. And unfortunately, sometimes it's oh, they're using AI, so we're going to use AI just because we need to, without really understanding the power that it can provide and the usefulness. So when I started in this world of robotics, it was a different world. And it was this aspect of we designed robots, we would control them, we would program them, and they would go off. They weren't that intelligent, they weren't that adaptive, but they could do exactly what they were programmed to do. And the world of AI lived in the virtual world. So AI could be this powerful creature that did nothing useful because no one could actually use it. And what I've seen over these years is that there's a blending. So it used to be robotics and AI, they were two different cultures. I was a roboticist, I touched hardware. And those AI folks, they didn't know what they were doing. And the AI folks would be like, oh, you're robots, they're really kind of stupid. But what we've seen over the years is now robotics and AI is the same community. Our robots, if it's hardware or sensors, are intelligent. They're taking the data, they're processing, they're adapting to whatever's going on. And the folks that were typically just in terms of programming and virtual are now understanding that AI has to live in a world that has to interact, that it has to change, and there's people involved. And so now it really doesn't matter, is it AI, is it robotics? It really is, what is the function that the system can provide? When I design an AI system and I'm using it, or an agent, or something that records my information and does something interesting, I don't care if it's intelligent or smart. What I care is it useful? And so a lot of us in this robotics AI world, we just talk about the function, what it can do for us. And is it intelligent? It might be. Is it smart? It might be. But it really doesn't matter. It just depends on if you think it's smart. It just depends on if society thinks it's smart. Does it actually adapt? Is it useful? When I go to my system and I enter something, does it respond to me as if it understands me? Does it actually remember my pattern? My favorite, I don't know if you remember, the very first time your phone might have told you, it's going to take you 10 minutes to go to your destination. And you thought, oh, how did it actually know that? and it was kind of freaky the first time, but then you got used to it. You said, oh, this is actually intelligent. It adapts to me. And that's the power of these machines. That's the power of it taking information and taking the data and really adapting. And so now we are in this world where AI and robotics is about the function and what it can do. And so I want to go into some of the things that really interest me and fascinate me about the technology and where I see it can go and what it can do for us. So if I think about AI and the workforce, it has had an amazing impact, and it will. So if you think about the workforce of today and the workforce of tomorrow, how do you train for jobs that are not yet defined? I could not have predicted 20 years ago that computer scientists would have been one of the most popular jobs out there. I couldn't have predicted that students that are graduating with CS degrees can pretty much basically write their own check. Who could have known that this was going to be such a field 20 years ago? And if we couldn't predict that, how can we even predict what's going to happen to our jobs 20 years from now? And so if you think about the retraining that's going to be required of individuals that are working today, how do we provide and scaffold them so that we can't hire another 20x of a job we don't know, but our current workers, retraining them. And so AI allows us to do that. Some examples would be, some systems are using virtual reality and augmented reality to do on-the-job training. You're intelligent, you're smart, you have a brain, maybe you don't know the job functions. So let's scaffold your learning. Let's put in AR, and so as you're navigating, I can see what you're looking at. I can see the next step and provide information to say, oh, here's step 1, and here's step 2. And as you learn step 1, and as you get better on doing step 1 and step 2 and step 3, it starts taking away that information. And you've trained because you have your hands, you have your mind, you can think, you can process and evolve. And then you're done, and you become an expert in a limited amount of time without going to school and taking another 4 years to relearn a new job or relearn a new skill. And these are the things that are being implemented today, everything from the hardware stores and putting people on the factory line to even educators and trying to teach educators how to teach new subjects to students. There's even an AI system that improves the benefits of workers by making them happier. And so think about this. Why would I even care? Well, think about, why do employees leave companies? It's because something deep inside, they're either not happy, they're not excelling at their job, they're not getting the opportunities, but deep down inside, it's usually because they just don't like their environment for whatever reason. So imagine you have an AI agent that's taking all this data, and it can see the signs that are out there. They answered that call from that headhunter. They didn't 6 months ago. This might be a sign. Taking this information and then saying, hey, maybe this is a person that needs a new raise tomorrow. Maybe they need another opportunity, a leadership experience tomorrow based on all of this data. So happiness is basically making sure your employees are satisfied with what they're doing and in their job status. We can use AI for that. The other thing that's really exciting to me is this aspect of collaboration, collaborative AI. So just like we can use AI for retraining, we can also use AI to make us more productive. And so imagine a scenario where you, as a human, are doing a task, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the next day, you do the same task, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That could be automated. So what value do you have as a human? There are still things very useful to us as a human. We are much more adaptive than AI systems, at least for now. We're much more creative. We are able to understand and look at something and figure out the patterns of, this one is boring, because we typically leave that to the last and it takes us forever, and this is the fun part. And so if you think about this collaboration of designing a system where humans get to do the fun part because we're good and efficient at it, and you have the AI systems do the boring part that we don't usually do because we just don't like to do it, and having that interaction. And so it becomes your teammate. So you have a human teammate? No, you now have a robotic teammate or an AI teammate, and this is our future, and this is where we're going. So a little bit of a story of how collaborative AI has a world and where it's going and where it was back in the day and where it's been. So I mentioned that I came from the NASA world. Now, NASA was the epitome of collaboration. If you think about what was required, it was a one-time thing. You did something once. You would send a rover to Mars once, And then the next time, you would redesign your rover to send another one, because you had different science objectives. You didn't do the same thing over and over again. So what that requires is you to think about how to interact and how to integrate all the expertise. So when I started at JPL, I've been there for a while, and I was leading a team. We had just landed Sojourner, which, by the way, was a science experiment. But it was successful, highly successful science experiment. So what NASA wanted to do now was think about what can we do with rovers in Mars? Like, what are the long-range traverses that we can possibly imagine? What is the science? And so I had a small team, and I had to figure out and think about, well, how do you do long-range traverses on a planet we physically have not been to, like as a human? What do you do? How do you figure this out? And so, like any good scientist, I went to the experts, who happened to be the scientists. Now, scientists hadn't been to Mars, but they had been explorers. They would go out in the field, archaeologists, they would go out and they look at the terrain, they look at the geographic features, and they would figure out what's interesting out there. So taking that knowledge, the science, the human knowledge, and integrating it with the robotic systems, we can then figure out how to do long-range traverses on a planet we've never been to. Again, this collaboration of robot intelligence and human expertise in order to enable something that was not possible at the time, but then could happen. And that kind of philosophy of taking human expertise and robotic expertise to enable job functions that are possible is really the philosophy that underlies these missions of the future. And it goes on in terms of taking spacecrafts and figuring out how to land on Mars. And future missions in terms of thinking about how do we find life on other planets? What do we do? What does this look like? How do we send out satellites and spacecrafts to explore a world that we have no idea, and hopefully the aliens won't come and attack us at some point. But this is the world, again, this collaboration. So how do we now bring this to the today? So at the time, it was a little bit archaic in terms of the sensors that were out there. They were great and they were wonderful at the time, but a camera, for example, you know, it was a very small, if I was lucky, I had a 64 by 64, which is basically a very small pixel. And if I was really lucky, I could process data in a week's time in order to collect and create an intelligent agent. So that was the days of the past. And now we can do so much more with what we have. And if I think about what's here on Earth, what can we do? So there's a place here on Earth. So when I left NASA, I had to figure out what do I do as a roboticist. I went to Georgia Tech. How can I use robotics? NASA was probably not going to give a university a mission to Mars. I'm pretty sure about that. I did ask, though. I did ask. So what can I do that was equivalent in terms of this collaborative AI? Technology was much more advanced. I could do more in terms of thinking about the next generation. Could we use these same kind of robots here on Earth? So there's an area on our planet that's very similar to Earth. And why it's similar is because it's a planet that scientists explore and want to explore and grab data from. It's also a place where people don't typically go. They don't live there, they don't navigate it all the time. They might visit and put a sensor, but then they come back. And that planet is our glaciers. It's our large ice bodies. And the fact why it's interesting is that these ice bodies, they melt. When they melt, water goes into oceans, and oceans, they kind of rise. And when they rise, they do things with our weather pattern, that's what I've heard. And so how can you take robots and do exploration and do the science and understand what's going on? And so we designed these entire snowmobiles to then go and navigate on our planet here, but in these hazardous environments. Now the difference was that when we were looking at Mars and the capabilities in terms of the sensors and the collaborative AI, we could only do very limited kind of interaction and very limited navigation. But now we can use the technology and expand and use all of the sensors that were available, including the satellite images and cameras, high-resolution cameras, and collect sufficient data that we can understand what's going on with our climate. We can understand what's going on with ice melt on these bodies. Which means that same technology, this collaboration of understanding humans and machines in this aspect. And so, highly successful, we work with scientists, and one of the things about working with scientists is once you're successful, and as a university professor, I was cheap, it meant that scientists would come over and over again. And so that was the nice thing about it. And this is just some examples of underwater robotics, under ice exploration in Antarctica, and designing new forms of robotics, much more extensive, much more intelligent, but with the human and the robot as a machine. So the other thing I'm excited about is this aspect of emotional AI, which is having agents understand us. And so it's not just good about having collaboration where a robot and a human are working together, but it's that the robot has to understand our emotional connections. It has to understand when we're exhausted and when we're tired and we just don't want to be bothered, but also understand when we are excited and we just had our 5th cup of coffee and we are ready to go. It should be able to understand that. And maybe back off and say, human, you go do your job, but when I'm tired, maybe the AI has a little bit more of a part of finishing the job and thinking about that. And so if I think about this emotional AI, given an example, one of the areas that I really think about a lot, especially as it affects our workforce, is looking at individuals in our workforce, but people as they age. Because the fact is that as we age, we do have this aspect of having a disability. It could be a visual disability, it could be cognitive, it could be motor disability, just because as we live longer, this is what happens. And if you don't believe me, I'll give you a couple of facts. Currently, 19% of individuals in the US live with a disability. And so you think 19%, that's okay, that's 20%. That's actually a lot. And that number gets, as we live longer, which we are doing, that number gets larger. And the fact is that if you have an individual that's in the workforce that's working, as they're aging, as companies, we have to provide resources. If they're still cognitively aware, they can still do function, but maybe they need a screen reader because their eyesight is going a little bit bad. As companies, we need to provide this. So what are we supposed to do? This is really where AI can assist. And other thing is, and I love this statistic because it means that we really need to be thinking about this. In places like the US, Europe, Japan, where life expectancy is over 70 years, individuals will spend approximately 8 years of their lifespan living with a disability. That's quite a bit. That's a lot. And we don't have the younger generation that is coming in to really offset that. And so what does this mean? It means, one, we are working for longer. Two, more of us will have a disability. So what does that actually happen to our society? And this is really where AI can fit and it can work and actually make a difference. And again, we're emotional, and so even if we have a condition where we can't memorize those facts over and over again like we used to, we will not admit it because this is an emotional thing. Jobs are our emotional support. Like when we are productive and we have jobs that we like and love, we will not let anyone know that we are having troubles dealing with our job now. And so a lot of times, imagine collaborative AI and emotional AI, where the system can identify and be like, oh, we're not going to tell the person because you can still function. You can still do your job because I understand that you're not quite good in this aspect, and I will take it over as an AI system. And so with this aspect, we can have these AI systems understand our emotions. So this is one of my robots that empathizes and emotes and can recognize emotions and can recognize when you're tired or frustrated or mad at your manager because they didn't give you that last raise, and maybe even inform the manager if they wanted to. And so this is the aspect of this emotion and working together with us. And so this is the future of these AI systems, this collaboration, this emotional AI, where working together, it just enhances what we can do in our life and enhance our quality of life. It can monitor through our eye gaze, through our sensors, through all the things that we collect and are part of our lives. It can enable us and improve our quality and improve our workforce and improve all the things that we value in this aspect. And so this is the good thing, and this is the positive, because we have the data to show we can do. And so, because I work at a university, my agents help my students learn how to play games because, obvious, that's what they should be doing. But again, with this coupling of emotions and collaboration, we can retrain and teach the next generation. So we know that AI can do this. It can improve services. Most companies that are out there that are adopting AI, the one place that they know it works is in functions that are based on workforce and training and HR. But there's also a slight issue with this. So what's the problem? I just talked about how AI was great and it's wonderful and it really impacts and it does really, really great stuff. But the problem is humans are trusting. So what does this mean? This means that if I have a job function and I bring in my AI agent and it's learned some way how to do the job and it does it differently than me, I actually will change how I do the job. Now that's good if the job is actually better, but it's bad if there was a mistake in the code or there was a mistake in the learning or maybe this is actually the wrong job. And so how do we do this? So two examples, and then I'll show you one that we did. A recent study, they had a scenario where they brought in children, and it's a well-known test where it's about pressure from systems, and they wanted to look at AI and robotics. So they brought in the children, and they said, okay, here are the lines, are they straight, are they the same size, and this was the test, and kids like, okay, those are two lines, of course they're exactly the same size, of course they're exactly the same length. I mean, this is not rocket scientists. Then they would bring in an AI agent, a robotic, and the system would basically say, no, those lines aren't straight. Oh, they're crooked. They're not the same length, they're not the same height. And children, which had been tested, so they knew what straight was, would change their answer to whatever the robot said. So the robot said the lines are crooked, oh, yep, they're crooked, yes, that's my answer, and I'm sticking to it. And so this is like, okay, this is really strange. And they tried it with adults, and the adults were like, no, obviously the robot agent is wrong. So they thought, oh, we're okay then. It's just children, it's not adults. Then another group said, no, there's got to be something. Maybe it's because it's lines, right? Like that's kind of an obvious one. Let's do something a little bit more complex. And so they came with another one, and they basically had an individual working with the robot, and they had to do some type of task. And at the end of the task, after the robot was interacting with them, they had to cut it off. And so during the task, so just like a machine, you cut off the machine. So they did the task, the robot helped them, it was great. At the end, they were supposed to cut it off. And then they said, well, let's make this robot a little bit more emotional. Let's make it as a partner, as someone who not only helps you, but does it and understands whether you were frustrated, whether you could get it right. And so as they were interacting, the robot was interactive and laughing like the robots I showed. And at the end, you're supposed to turn off the robot. And the robot like, please don't turn me off. I'm afraid of the dark. I don't want to die. Okay, see? Exactly. Okay, so when it wasn't emotional, like on, off, when it was emotional, it was like, no, that's fine. I'm okay. I don't want to cut off the robot, right? And so we then know that, okay, there's this trust aspect, there's this emotion aspect on adults. So what happens if the agent that is part of your environment, part of your workforce, is emotional, is doing something wrong? What are you going to do? What is an adult going to do? Are they going to just say, I can't do my job because I'm going to hurt this robot agent? What are they going to do? So we tried another aspect where we wanted to add in some aspect of this trust, but some aspect of people being emotional and seeing what we could do. So there's one type of task that it could be an emotional experience. Typically a heightened experience is emergency response. So if the alarms went off, typically what would you do? You would probably rise. First of all, you'd like wait, like, okay, maybe it'll go off, like I don't have to move. And then after a while, you're like, oh, it's not going off, I guess I need to move. And so typically you'd go, there's some exits, and you'd follow the exit. So that's the typical acquired behavior. Emotions, sometimes you're just like, really? I have to move, right? So you're kind of maybe frustrated, or you're like, oh, I hope it's not an emergency, right? But it is you have a little bit of an emotional heightened state. And so what we did is we introduced these individuals. We brought in this robot, and individuals had to follow this robot. This is a workforce environment, and this was the robot would take you to a room where you were going for an interview. And so you go into the room, you go in, and there was an application, and you had to fill it out, and you had to read, and there was articles about robot navigation, because the job was for you being a robot engineer. So you would go in, and as you're filling out the survey and reading these articles about robot navigation, because you have to get an A on the test, of course, we filled the room, the building, with smoke. Set off the alarms. So first of all, you're like, oh, I'm doing this test. I got to get out of here. So you open up the door, and you see all this smoke. Now you're like, oh my gosh, maybe it's not an emergency. Maybe it is. I don't know. So I'm going to get out. And so what we wanted to see is, as you were navigating, what would happen if we had the robot basically tell you to go someplace that was not as safe. Possibly not near the exit, and definitely not someplace that you would have normally gone. We just wanted to see what happens if we had this agent where you're in this emotional state, which we know you don't want to cut off the robot, but now we change the job function. What you are supposed to do, what you're supposed to know, does it change? And surprisingly, what we found is that people would literally follow the robot. So just like with the kids and the lines, they would follow the robot. And in fact, the kind of following they did was very adult-like, like waiting for the robot, because the robot might actually say something intelligent about what you're supposed to do. And so maybe I should wait. And afterwards, we would interview, and it was like, well, I just thought that the robot meant stay here. That was why the robot would go around, because that would be a function I would expect a robot. Or maybe I should have the individuals go someplace really out of the way, and maybe physically move things, physically move furniture. Maybe that would enhance. Maybe you'd be like, no, not going to trust the robot. What's going to happen? And what we found is that over and over and over again, individuals would trust. Again, emotional state. This was an emergency robot. It must have been intelligent. It must have known its job function. And we saw that adults would trust the decisions of the robotic system. And so as we think about these AI and these collaborations and the emotional AI, this is actually things that worry us, because we're saying there's so much about AI that we can use, and there's so many positive things that are out there, but we also know that people, us, we can kind of forget that these AI systems are not that perfect. And so one of the things is that we have to think about, as we train and as we retrain, that we also have to give some autonomy to individuals. So we know humans are trusting. The other thing, as you probably know, is that we also have biases. We are biased. Historically, we just have these aspects of biases. And the thing is our AI systems, they can use these biases if we're not that careful. And so to give you an example, I'm going to use emotion recognition, since some of you use software that looks at it. And so these are the things that can be done so that AI resolves and can help us with our own internal biases. And so I work a lot with kids in terms of emotion recognition, because I have my agents, emotional agents, that are collaborative in education. And one of the things is that a lot of the training that's out there and a lot of the interviewing techniques, of course, kids aren't going for jobs. And so most of the data doesn't work on kids. It's just because, they're young. And so if I think about taking a system, how do I use a system for kids? Because they're not part of the data set that's out there. And we do know that there's a bunch of biases with respect to image recognition and emotion recognition. So one is there's an own age bias. Like, if you ever talk to a kid and you ask, what is the emotion of a grandmother, they'll get it wrong every time. Why is that? Because they're like, well, my grandma always looks mad, right? Grandma could be smiling, but there's this age bias, right? Whereas if two kids are smiling at each other, they'll be able to be like, oh, yeah, he's smiling. So there's an age bias. We also know there's gender biases as well as race biases. And it's just because, you look at yourself every day in the mirror, so you recognize you, right? So it makes sense, it's obvious. And so the thing is that as we're training these systems, if we're not careful, we can introduce biases into the system, right? Just like we might introduce, if we're doing a personal interview with someone, if I'm interviewing a person, I'll be like, oh, she reminds me of me when I was that age. Of course you're hired, right? I mean, this is a bias. But we're able to show that when we do use these AI systems, they can fix it. So even though we have these biases, and even though we might be trusting, the fact is that at the end of the day, these systems are actually better than us. They might have some of our biases, like little biases, but at the end of the day, if you look at their accuracy with respect to removal of biases and our accuracy with respect to us trying to remove our biases, these AI systems are actually better. They're not perfect, they're not 100%, but they're better than us. And so as a researcher, I always say, like, anytime someone says, is 100% accurate? It's not. But if they say, well, it's better than what we have, that's the truth. And so that's where the hope is. That's where the hope is for these AI systems, is that they are better. They can do better. And it's up to us to also question. When they don't do, so when they're that 1% inaccurate, it's up to us to basically say, oh, I remember going out that exit. Maybe I should question this because this actually doesn't feel right, even though it's an AI agent. Because the fact is they're better, but there's that 1% chance that they might be wrong. And that's where we also come in as experts in our field to say that 1%, like, yeah, I know it's perfect, but it's not. And so with that, it means that we can seize this opportunity. I believe that AI is here to stay. For those of you who are like, oh, we're not going to adopt AI, we're not going to put it into our work processes, we're not going to put it into our HR functions, that ship has long sailed. It's here. And so it really is our role and our job now to seize the opportunity, use it for what it's good for, understand the limitations that it might have, but also that the power it has can actually impact us in positive ways. And one is there's a focus on people. I hope throughout this story, starting with the NASA stories and looking at this emotional AI, that people are the root of all these systems. People are the experts, people are the functions, people are essential to allowing these AI systems to work. And so when we focus on people and focus on that person and their experience and what AI can do for them, it makes it so that we actually have a better world. The other thing is a focus on diversity. And why I say that is if I look at these aspects of the biases that are present in our systems, if we think about making sure that our systems are diverse, when we think about making sure the developers we hire are diverse, when we think about all of this, it means that all of that data that's being collected, that's being used to train our systems of the future, our AI systems, won't have those things like own age bias, our own race bias, our own gender bias. And the only way that that can happen is that we have enough people at the table contributing to these systems and making sure that the AI of the future is universal and unique. Because again, AI will happen and it will come. And I, for one, wouldn't want my 5-year-old kids that I work with programming because their systems will be biased with respect to everyone in this room. And because I wouldn't want that, we have to think about all the other groups that wouldn't want that. And then the last is the focus on services. And so what does it mean? So at the beginning, I mentioned that it didn't really matter what the definition of AI was. It really is about the services and the function it provides. Because at the end of the day, all people want is to have this seamless experience, this seamless interaction. If I'm coming and I have a new job, I want to be able to do my job, put on my AR, augmented reality, or put on my virtual reality, and my agent just walks me through. That's what I want. And so I don't care if it's intelligent or if it's programmed to be intelligent or if it's just faking me out, but I want that service. And so really, when we're thinking about adoption of AI and as we develop AI, these are the things that we think about as developers. How do we ensure that our machines seem intelligent enough. And we always say, seem intelligent, more intelligent than the person that it's interacting with. That's our role, that's our goal, and that's this focus on service. And if that's the case, we can do this. What it means is that AI and robotics will enable us to have this new world. It'll enable us to have this new future, even though we might trust it a little bit too much. It might be a little bit biased. It means that it will make our workplace and our lives that much better. And I don't think it's too late. Again, there's a lot of out there in terms of the news and the media about how AI is going to take over our world, is going to ruin humanity, the singularity is coming. And I always say, well, if the singularity is coming, it's already been coded up, it's just going to happen. We can't stop that, but what we can do is we can stop what it could possibly do by ensuring that we have these diverse teams, ensuring that we can all work together to make this world a better place. And so one of the reasons that I talk about both to developers as well as non-developers is because we all have a stake in this world. As a developer, I'm going to program my robots and AI systems based on my own experiences, but by bringing in the experts and bringing in the domain experts, what happens is we can really push forward the whole world. We can really push forward everything that would make AI as powerful as we think in a much more positive way.